never thanked openly for what happened to me and how I got through it. The first one is my mother. She was left with 3 children. My father went to the war in 1940. I was born in 1939. So he was a year old and he left. He came back a few times to see her. And then in 1942, he was sent to Stalingrad, which was the shortest and worst battle. There was 300,000 German soldiers went there. Only 60,000 came back. 90,000 were prisoners in Russia, and the rest of them either died or starved to death or froze to death. So I don't want to go too deeply into that because later on I'm just talking about myself, so you're going to know more about me than anybody else. So this has to do with my father, which we didn't know after. The last soldiers came home in 1950, and my mother always thought he would come back, even though before my father went to the war, he used to meet his friends on Friday nights, and they used to play cards. And then when he came home, he always knocked on the window and told my mother, "Elsie, I'm home." And she opened the door and let him in. Well, December 22nd in 1942, my father was in Stalingrad. My mother woke up with hearing my father saying, "Elsie, I'm home." But she found out in 1950, when everybody else came home, my father didn't come home. She got a letter from the government saying that December 22, when my mother had the dream, my father died. So later on, as a child, I never thought about it, but as an adult, I talked to my mother about that many times. I think God wanted to let her know that he didn't suffer, that he died immediately. So that kind of made her feel better. So, the next chapter. It was in 1945. These things my mother told me, but in 1945 I was 6 years old, and I was always blessed with a really good memory. So I remember everything that happened from 1945 on. So shortly before, in February of 1945, we had to leave Silesia. I was born in Silesia, which borders north to Russia, east to Poland, and south to Czechoslovakia. So that part of Silesia was never given back, because when the Russians moved in, they moved into Poland, and the Poles moved into that part of Germany. So after the war, it was never given back. So in January of 1945, there was a knock on the door, and I, like all children, ran and opened the door, and all I saw were black boots all the way up to the knees, and a black uniform with a lot of medals on it, and it was the SS. And they interrogated my mother. They took her away because she wouldn't buy that leather Hitler brought out every month, and somebody told on her. So they wanted to know why she didn't do that. So the 3 of us stayed in. Neighbors watched us, but thank goodness, I thank God for that again. She came home the same day. Then a month later, February of 14th of February, 1945. A loudspeaker of the army came through town saying that by 4 o'clock this afternoon, Schweidnitz, which is my hometown where I was born, has to be evacuated. We have to go farther in to Western Germany because the Poles are moving in to that part, and we don't know what happens. We could get killed, we could be okay, but my mother's sister was married to a soldier from Bavaria, Kitzingen. That's where I grew up then. That's what I call my hometown. And they said if ever anything would happen, we would all meet in Kitzingen. So they said that it's probably just going to be a couple of weeks and we can come back home. So my mother put all the plants in the bathtub and wrote a letter to my father in case he would come home saying where we are so he can find us. Well, we never got to go back. And we went to the train station. We had to be out by 4 o'clock that afternoon, the same day. There were 2 days where they have all the people, 1.5 million people from Silesia moved in those 3 days. And we were lucky to know where to go because we knew we had to go to my aunt's husband's family who were farmers. So we started out going to the train station, and there were thousands of people. My mother had a little wagon, and she put extra things in it, and we all had a backpack. Oh, I forgot about one thing. My birthday was in March, so my mother had bought me a doll, my very first doll. So I got to take my doll with me. My doll went with me everywhere, and she was my security blanket. And we got on the train, but all the luggage, they said, the luggage will all be in one wagon. Well, by the time we got there, we got in the train, and the train took off. All the luggage was left behind. So we only had what we had on our backs, and nothing else. And the way to get to Kitzingen, we didn't know that the war was raging. It was the last 2 months of the war. This was February, and in April, the end of April, the Second World War was over. So the bombing started. The Americans started moving in through France, taking Aachen, and then started moving west to start destroying the cities. So anyway, we didn't know all that. We just knew we were going to go away, and my mother said two weeks later, we'll come back home and we'll be fine. So we left, but we had to go through Czechoslovakia. But Czechoslovakia was under German control, so naturally they all hated the Germans. So we were in Prague at the train station. I have one of my brothers is 3 years older than I am, so he was 8, and the other one was 11, and I was 6, 9, 12, right? Yeah, 3 years. So anyway, my mother had to get some papers signed, which was outside of the train station, and we had to stay there and waited for her, and she told us, and we always obeyed the rules, because in those days you had to. So many people and families got separated. So we stayed in one corner. I don't know how long she was gone, but we just sat there waiting for her, and she got the papers, and we were able to go back on the train. As soon as we got on the train and we were outside of Prague, the train was bombed. So we had to leave the train, and soldiers were in the train, German soldiers. They carried me up in the woods. I remember all that. So we had to wait till that was over, but the trains were all demolished, so we couldn't go any farther. And we walked and walked, and I don't know how long we walked. And then we got to another town and took another train. And I don't know the details on that. It was a long time. We got to Nuremberg, which was only 40 minutes from Kitzingen. But Nuremberg, 2 days before we got there, was destroyed. So we got out there, and the first thing I saw was these huge buildings. They were all glowing. They were all swaying back and forth, and people laying on the street and so on. Well, it wasn't, it was bad. Soldiers were there, German soldiers. They gave us directions how to get. So we found, I don't know how it all came about, but we were on horse wagons and cow wagons, and it took us like, I think, 6 hours to get 40 miles to Kitzingen. So when we got to Kitzingen, I think we went to Fürth, and I think there was another train, and the train got us to Kitzingen. And we got out of the train station, and we heard the sirens, and people said, every time you hear a siren, you have to go for shelter. So we went into that building, and there were so many people in that building. And it was a kindergarten building. And my mother asked if they ever had a bomb raid, and they said no. So she took us out of there. She said, we're not staying. And they said, we can't protect you if you're leaving. She said, no, we want to get where we had to go. They told us where the farmhouse was, where we had to go. And we went out, and the first planes started throwing bombs. And we found out later on that building we were supposed to be in, all the children, 40 children died in that building, and we would have been some too. So anyway, we got to the farmhouse, Frau Röder, I remember her. She was my aunt's mother-in-law. Very mean lady, very, very, very mean. And she looked to me, I always told my mother, she said she was very, very thin, very tall, and dressed in black, very mean, and I thought she was a witch. So we sat down, she knew we were coming, but she wasn't very happy, but she gave us a room. And it was a room 8 by 10. And it was my 2 brothers and my mother and I, and we lived in that room for 2 years. So we had no money, no food, and it was a time that was probably the worst because my mother didn't know where to get food for us, and so we had to go and beg food from the farmers. And then my aunt came, and they came from Liegnitz, also in Silesia. They took a different route than us, so they came 2 weeks later. And she had a 1-year-old child, my cousin, who I always go and visit now, and my grandmother. So my uncle was still in the war, but he was able to come back, so he was one of the fortunate ones. So they came, and she always also had a dog. She brought the dog. And one day, the dog got a hold of my doll and chewed it up. And that was the only thing I had. And it was so traumatic for me that I carried the head around for a long time. Just the head. I remember that so well. But then my brothers took the head and played soccer with it. And I never got another doll again. So anyway, that was in February. In April, the Americans started coming in, and everybody was afraid. The soldiers started coming in. We all had to raise white flags in front of our houses saying that we surrendered. And so they walked in on either side of the road, just marching in. And everybody afraid. They searched every house. But the soldiers brought us Hershey bars so for the children. And I never had chocolate before, and I didn't want to eat that black stuff. So my brothers ate it. And so anyway, they were very good to us. But Kitzingen was 75% destroyed. And we had 4 bridges that went across the river to the old, we lived in the old town, and the schools and churches were in the new town. Catholic Church on the left-hand side of the river, and Protestant Lutherans on the right side. So Americans started setting up soup kitchens in towns, and people, the older people especially, just disliked the Americans so much. Naturally, they destroyed the Germans. That, you know, they took over, and there were no Germany anymore. So anyway, but they set up soup kitchen, and my mother took us to the soup kitchen every day, and we had food, and it was just amazing. And they were so kind and so nice to us. So then school started. The bridges all were destroyed, so they built ferries, just wooden plaques, huge ones, just to put the children on to cross the river to go to school. So the schools were destroyed. The Protestant school was destroyed, the elementary school and the high school. So we were in a hall. It was later on like a gymnastic hall or something like that, but they set up benches, and that's where we sat. We had no blackboards, no books, no nothing. We just sat there. For the first year, we only listened. We only learned by listening. And then the second year got better. The Americans brought everything we needed for the school, and they also brought school lunches, which was in the second year. But the first year, I always went to school without food, because we only got a certain amount. We got 1 loaf of bread a week and a half a gallon of milk a week. Well, I had 2 older brothers. You know, they needed more food than I did. And so I gave them my food. And the teacher, this is about the 3 people I wanted to thank. One was my mother, one was my teacher, and then the most important person was naturally God. Because without God, I wouldn't be here today. My family wouldn't be here. So the teacher found out that I always just sat there when they had their little lunches, and school was only till 12:30 every day for the first 2 years. And so she started asking me if I would take her book satchel, would you call it, a bookcase or whatever, if I would carry it home for her. And she knew my mother was working, so I told her, sure, I would. So she was the one for the first year who took me home every day. It was my job to help her. And she gave me lunch. She always said, I'm eating lunch, she said, but I just can't eat a whole sandwich by myself. Would you eat a half a sandwich? So I always got a half a sandwich. And I was friends with that teacher all my life until she passed away one year. When I was in Germany, I was able to go to her funeral. But she met my children, and she met my husband, and so she was an amazing, amazing person. So that was that. Then after 2 years, now comes the part that kind of, we got an apartment, first time, our own apartment, which was 1 bedroom and a bathroom. And this apartment, I think Judy saw a picture of the apartment building. Last time I was there, I took a picture of it because it's still there, and I always think of it when I go there. So, but there was nothing in the apartment. And in those days, it was 78 years ago, you had a coal stove in the living room. You heated with wood and stove and coal. In the kitchen was a tiny little gas stove, and there was no furniture, nothing in there. There was a bathtub, and there was a big, like a water cooler in there, but it all had to be heated by coal. Well, we got an apartment, but we didn't have coal, and we didn't have any furniture. So the farmers that I became friends with their son, they knew, and they said, oh, well, why don't we give you some potato crates and tomato crates? So we got potato crates and tomato crates, 4 of them to sit down, and then we slept on the floor. We had some blankets, and so we did that for a while, until 1947, my mother started working for the Americans, and she cleaned the officers' club and worked in people's houses, cleaning houses and things like that. So she must have told them that, you know, we have an apartment, we don't have anything. So one day an army truck came and they brought us army furniture, all green furniture. So a green closet and then a green table and then they brought us beds like the soldiers sleep in, those, you know, metal framed cots, yeah, 4 of them. So we each had, and then they brought us army blankets, green ones, and so they really took care of us, which was amazing, and we just felt like, you know, we were in heaven, and that Christmas, when the Americans brought their families over, all the American families were supposed to adopt a German family for Christmas. But my mother didn't have any money to buy a Christmas tree or presents anyway. So this family, I never forget their name, was Captain and Mrs. Rosini. I always tried to find them after I came to this country, but I couldn't. They picked us up in the car. First time I ever rode in a car. I was 8 years old by then. So they picked us up and brought us to their house. And they opened the door, and I walked in, and I saw this Christmas tree. And it was the most beautiful thing I ever saw in my whole life. It had red balls on it, and big ones. They probably were normal, but to me, they were huge. I could see my face in them. And I just sat in front of that tree and just looked at that tree. It was just amazing. And then they gave us presents. They gave me a red hat and red mittens and a red shawl. And they gave my brother things, and then they gave me a box of Whitman candy. And I never forget that, because I didn't eat the candy right away. My brothers ate theirs right away, and I was hiding mine. And I still had some on my birthday in March, because I wouldn't eat them all. And that impressed me so much. I kept that box and put all my little things in it I liked. And I even, when I got married, I even took it to the States with me and had my little treasures in it. And then I walked into one of the drugstores once, and I saw this tower of Whitman candy. And I could never buy, up till today, I can't buy any Whitman candy, because it meant so much to me at that time. So then the nicest thing that happened to me is the German children weren't allowed to play with me because I didn't have a father and we were refugees. So in school they didn't know that I was a refugee, but in the neighborhood they did. So they kind of shunned us, and you know, we weren't good enough. So I was sat on the front stoop, and across the street from us were the same apartment buildings, and there were all American families. And so that I saw this little American girl always going to school. While I was going to school, she was standing there waiting for a school bus. So we started waving at each other, and then we got acquainted, and she wasn't allowed to come over to my side, and I wasn't allowed to go over to the other side. So we just waved at each other, and so then I don't know how because she didn't speak any English, and German, and I didn't speak a word of English, but we got acquainted, and her name was Judy. And I never met another Judy until I came here. I met our Judy. So anyway, we finally got together, and we played together. I was allowed to cross the street. She wasn't allowed to come to our side. And I don't know how I learned a word here and there, and maybe she did. I don't know how we communicated, but her mother and father asked me if I would like to go with them on Sundays, on a Sunday. And I had no idea where we were going. Just riding in a car was just the greatest thing for me. I'll ride in a car. Sure, I go. I begged my mother to go. She said, okay, even though she didn't know where we were going. So the first Sunday we went to the Army base, and there was a little church. As a matter of fact, that is the little church I got married in later on in life. But this is the first time I saw the little white church. And we went in there, and all the big people went at one place, and all the little people went another place. We went to Sunday school. So I thought, oh, this is a nice place. They're singing. I don't know what they're singing, but it's really pretty. And then there were cookies and juice, and I just thought it was just the greatest thing. And so this is the first song I learned. I went every Sunday with her. Then Judy asked me to go. We became really good friends for 3 years, and then she went back to the States. So the first song I learned was "Jesus Loves Me, This I Know." And I sang, and I really loved singing it. I sang it at home. My mother said, "What are you singing?" I said, "I don't know, but I like it so." I had no idea what I was singing until later on when I learned a little more English, and I knew what I was singing. But what I'm getting at is, without God, I wouldn't be here. He protected us through the whole trip, and so many things happened. Once I fell from the ferry that took us to school. I fell overboard. And we had these school satchels on the back, and that kept me afloat, but I kept floating down the river, and I didn't know how to swim. So they had to, get me out, but, I could have drowned, but I think God helped me up. I really do believe that all happened to me. So then in the winter, my brothers were supposed to watch me, and there was a pond in the back of the apartments, and they went ice skating there and on the ice, but they sent me out to see if the ice was good enough. So, and I did it. They asked me to, and it looked good, and so I went out and I broke through the ice and went under the ice, and so I almost drowned then. But I made it again. So anyway, I probably have more stories, but I'll be here until tomorrow. So I just wanted you to know that, it was a sad time. It was really bad. People were hungry and no food. For the longest time, we had no food. And that was the worst thing. I remember that. And my mother, she felt so bad not being able to feed us. She worked two shifts in a factory, and that was the worst thing for me. And I was scared to death of the dark. And sirens, when I heard sirens, it scared the heck out of me. And the darkness. So when she was on the afternoon shift and it was dark in the evening, I used to open all the windows in the apartment and sat on the windowsill and sang real loud, turned on all the lights in the apartment and sang. Nobody ever complained, but I waited until my mother came home, and then I was able to go to bed, and that was usually 9:30 or 10 o'clock. Then I had to go to school in the morning. So things were tough for a while, but they got better. And then later on, I worked for the American Army as a hygienist, and that's where I met my husband. So anyway, I think I'll stop there. I probably forgot a lot of things, but I think that's enough. And the reason I'm saying it this time, it's my mouth is getting dry. I thought it's okay to say it in church, and then the reading today was, we are afflicted but not crushed, struck down, but not destroyed. God said, light will shine out of darkness. So the extraordinary power belongs to God. It does not come from us. So I think I stopped.